we learned about this story of Reb Chia and Reb Yonasan. And Reb Chia and Reb Yonasan, they were going in the Beis HaKvaros, and the tzitzis of Reb Yonasan was dragging on the graves. And Reb Chia told him, he says, you got to lift up your tzitzis. Now, what's the term that the Gemara uses for tzitzis?
I have to go backwards.
The term in the Hebrew is techelta, the techeles, the blue string. That's what the way it calls the tzitzis was the techelta. Interesting that it uses that term. So his tzitzis were on the grave, and Reb Chia was telling him, you got to lift them up. And otherwise, it's like we are macharif them. We are making a embarrassment, mocking them. And so they got into a discussion. Do the dead really know what's going on? Reb Chia proved that Reb Yonasan learned the wrong interpretation of the verse.
Rabbi, what page are we on? I'm sorry, because you didn't say that. It was in here.
So I'm going over page 18a, the bottom of 18a.
Thank you.
But we're really on 18b. We really turned the page on Friday. I'm just going over 18a, the bottom.
I apologize. Thank you.
So there was a discussion here between Reb Yonasan and Reb Chia. And Reb Chia, at least, is trying to prove that Reb Yonasan's understanding of the verse was wrong. What was Reb Yonasan's verse that he brought? He brought a verse from Ecclesiastes. And the verse says that the dead don't know anything. The dead do not know anything. This is the verse from Ecclesiastes that implies pretty clearly that once they're dead, they don't, they're not embarrassed. They shouldn't be embarrassed if we walk with tzitzis. And Reb Chia argued with him. He says, no, you translated the verse wrong. And he explained to him that what does it mean the dead don't know anything? It means the wicked. The wicked, even in their life, they're called dead. And the righteous, even in their death, they're called alive. And this verse says that the righteous, or the living, which we're translating as the righteous, they know sheyamusu. They know that they're going to die, and therefore they always make sure to act correctly and properly. And therefore they're called chayim. They're called alive. The chayim yoidim sheyamusu. Chayim means the tzaddikim. They know that they're gonna die, meaning that they're not going to be able to do mitzvahs, and therefore they control themselves, and therefore they're called chayim. They're called alive. And he brings a verse from the Benayahu ben Yehoyada, and this was an interesting person, Benayahu ben Yehoyada. The verse is a very poetic verse in Samuel that says that he was a ben ish chai. He was the son of a living man. And the Talmud, builds on that verse, and it explains what does that mean. He was a son of a living man. What are all people? Were so the everyone or everyone else is the son of not a living person, and the answer is that his father was, even when he died, he was called living. And the reason was his father was also a very righteous person. And that's the term Ben Ish Chai. Now, it was a very poetic verse. It had a number of interesting insights, which maybe we'll start there today. I just want to go over a few points on this specific Gemara that we just said outside. Number one, it's interesting that it does not mention the issue is the tzitzis within Daled Amos. 4 cubits of the grave. It doesn't mention that. It mentions that the tzitzis are on top of the grave. That was the issue. And the commentaries of the Gemara, they try to deal with this. Why is he only concerned that the tzitzis are on the grave? They're dragging on the grave, and he's concerned that you should lift them up. What is lifting them up going to do?
It's showing the people, we're showing respect, honor,
Yes,
and respect.
you're correct. We don't want to embarrass the dead that cannot fulfill mitzvahs anymore. That's true. But if that was the reason, it should apply within Dalet Amos. As we spoke about, we mentioned the halacha about the tefillin in a cemetery, and other items, holding a Sefer Torah or learning in a cemetery. So that really applies to Dalet Amos, the law of the 4 cubits, 6 to 8 feet. That would seem to be the law. And here it seems like Reb Chia is only concerned about the tzitzis dragging. Yes, Yehuda.
Rabbi.
No, I'm sorry, Yehuda.
Yeah. Regardless of a cemetery, the tzitzis shouldn't be dragging on the ground anyway.
So that's an interesting point. That what about the fact that they're dragging, and that would seem to be, embarrassing the tzitzis. Now, Reb Chia doesn't mention that. He says, Kedei shelo yomru. If you look at the wording in the Talmud, he doesn't mention that. He says, in order that they shouldn't say that tomorrow they're coming upon us, and they're going to come to us, they're going to come near us, and now they're mocking us. So in other words, he's more concerned about that than the fact that the tzitzis are on the ground. So this is really a halachic question. To what extent do the law of tzitzis dragging on the ground, is that a problem for tzitzis? Would that be an obligation and a prohibition to have the tzitzis touching the ground? So
In this time, talks about wearing them under the clothing.
Just one second. So the Magen Avraham mentions that you should be careful not to have tzitzis, on the floor. And he asked this question in Shulchan Aruch. So Yehuda, you've asked a very good question. This is the Magen Avraham's. And the question is, the Gemara, there are sources that there's a problem. And our Gemara doesn't seem to hold this way. So what are the answers that the commentaries give? The number one is that the stone of the grave was a little higher than the earth. And because of that, it wasn't considered dragging on the earth, because it was really higher, it was elevated, the stone of the grave. And therefore it was dragging on the stone of the grave, but not on the earth. And therefore it wasn't a problem. That's the Magen Avraham's answer. The other commentaries, the Magen Avraham also mentions that the main problem when it's on the earth, when it's dragged on the ground, is when you put it on, because it looks like you're sweeping the floor with it. But if while you're walking, it's not necessarily a problem. In other words, the main problem could be that it's only when you're actually putting it on, but afterwards, it wouldn't be an embarrassment for the mitzvah because it looks like, maybe it just fell lower. In other words, it's not the main embarrassment is when you're looking at it and watching it and seeing it on the floor. That would be an embarrassment. Now, there is another opinion that says there's a difference between a talus, which is special set aside for davening, and on that you have to be careful that it doesn't drag on the floor. And this was considered his clothing, and on the clothing it's not a prohibition. So that's a very interesting point, that it could be that when it's your clothing, it's different than a talus. The talus is special for davening. That's where the prohibition of dragging on the floor applies. But if it's your tzitzis, and especially in those days when their tzitzis was more part of their clothing that they wore, so it was, in other words, it wasn't even a special garment, or possibly it included the idea of tzitzis. Maybe, this would be a question: would the tzitzis that we wear today, this be included? So it seems like it's not so clear that there's a problem with our tzitzis drags on the floor. Our talus, you have to be careful from, but our tzitzis, maybe there's a leniency, because it's really our clothing. Just happens to be we put tzitzis on it, but it's not special for davening, and therefore it doesn't have the holiness of a talus.
Rabbi. Yeah.
Rabbi, I've been waiting a while. Can I say something?
Just one second. We need to learn patience over here. Take it easy. We're going to get to everyone. Okay. So, but that was a very good question, Yehuda, and thank you for bringing it up. So, Moshe, I think you were first. Moshe?
Yes. It's not a matter of kafsut even, but you would think it'd be tuma in the, in their during the kever, it'd be a matter of being tuma, touches the ground, and that's a place where there was a burial. Now, with regard to the tzitziot, having been more machmir as opposed to a talet, the tzitziot. Let's say a mechanic, he's working and he wears he wears tzitzit, and he's working on a vehicle, and the oil gets all over his shirt and it drips all over the tzitziot. You know what I'm saying? Isn't that, that's an example,
So you
he's
seem to mention
soiling his
2
shirt,
points.
and the shirt becomes soiled, and then the tzitziot, become soiled also, and it gets all over the tzitzit,
So you're mentioning 2 points. One is that you think you're saying there's tumah, and that would be an issue. And the second thing you're mentioning is that it's getting dirty on the ground, that it's dirtying it. It's worse than just dragging on the floor, but it's getting dirty. Is that your 2 points?
Yes, more or less. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting question about the tumah. I'm not aware of any problem of tumah, more than the fact that you're inside the cemetery. You're going to go next to the grave. That itself is the same, it's the same tumah that's going to be there if it drags on the floor, or it hovers over, if it tents over a grave, or, so there's no issue that I know of the tumah that's worse when it drags or it doesn't drag. That
We
would be
define the term tuma for those of us.
Tumah
who
means,
don't
thank
know.
you. Yeah, okay. It's good you brought that up. Tumah means impurity. So
Okay.
there's an impurity in a cemetery. And but the thing is that once you go in the cemetery, you're basically going to become impure, and it's not going to make a difference if the strings are on the ground. I don't know of any issue of making clothing tameh either. So that to answer that the question, to answer the other question about the fact that they're getting dirty. And maybe that's more severe than just dragging on the floor, which maybe doesn't apply to tzitzis, but you think that if it got dirty, it would apply. I think that's a very interesting point that you make. That, in other words, there's two levels of embarrassment for tzitzis. Dragging on the floor is, okay, it's not so bad maybe, but if you're, getting it really filthy, that would be another story. And maybe that's correct. I'm not sure. That's an interesting point. We'd have to look through the Shulchan Aruch and the commentaries to see if they say that. Although I do think there is a verse that says Lo yachgeru b'yaza, which basically means we're not supposed to sweat. We're not supposed to cause the tzitzis to become all sweaty. And so I would have to look up if that would be a good source for your point, that maybe even if you hold that the tzitzis can drag on the floor, it would only be in a way that they're not getting very dirty and really disgusting. But if they would be getting disgusting, maybe that would be an issue. So yeah, so let's take a look. Remind me if I don't get back to you, if I don't look this up tomorrow, remind me. We'll have to look into
Sure.
that. That's a good point, Moshe. Okay, Ben, you had a question. Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say they call the tzitzit tchelet here, and tchelet is meant for us to remember the heavens. So when you drag the tchelet on the floor, it's opposite to the heavens. That's why people like our rabbi would pick up any tzitzit that he sees touching the carpet. He picks it up and puts it higher on the chair. Because you want to look up, not look down.
That's a good, interesting point. But I'm gonna throw you a counterpoint, and that is, what does the tcheles symbolize? It symbolizes the ocean.
The heavens.
The ocean, and the ocean reflects the heavens. So the tzitzis is supposed to actually make you think about the ocean down here, but the ocean then makes you think about the heavens, and then you think about the kisei hakavod. It's just
ocean is only an in between.
Okay.
The ocean is only an in between step. The idea is to look at the heavens.
I understand that that's the ultimate goal, but it's not. It doesn't seem so wrong if you're looking down at the tzitzis. If one of the steps is to look down and think of the ocean. I'm just saying, like, I don't know, such a powerful proof that to your. It's an interesting point that you make, that in other words, the goal of the tcheles, and it does mention this in the Talmud in Menachos. The Talmud does mention that ultimately the tzitzis is supposed to make us think of Hashem, to remember the commandments. The tcheles is blue, and so blue makes you think of the ocean, and the it says tcheles daima l'rakia. I should pull up the Gemara maybe, and we could see it. But
could I get a clarification, please?
Yes. What's bothering you?
Okay, I thought only rabbis wore tzitzis and Orthodox, the Orthodox Jewish people, not just the everyday man. When you're talking about somebody working on a car, getting oil all over the tzitzis, that to me is, I don't
contradiction.
understand.
Right. It's a contradiction because you're saying only rabbis, from your understanding, only rabbis wear it. That's the only thing is that's not correct. All Jewish men are meant to wear tzitzis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Now
13 on.
Even children. My son who's 10 is wearing tzitzis from 3 years old. From when they're basically potty trained, we put on tzitzis. That's more or less the story.
On their clothing, on the outside clothing, or on the underclothing?
Under their shirt. In between their undershirt and their shirt, they wear.
Okay.
So the Gemara, just to answer Ben, just to mention the point that we were talking about with Ben. The Gemara says that tcheles doima liyam, that the tcheles on the tzitzis, the blue, is similar to the sea, and the sea is doima l'rakia, and the sea is similar to the heavens, and the heavens is similar to the kisei hakavod, to the heavenly, the the throne of honor by of Hashem.
Seat.
And it says over there, by the throne of honor of Hashem, Livnas Hasapir, which is sapphire. So it's similar to sapphire. So therefore, we remember about Hashem and remember to do the mitzvahs. So anyway, it's interesting what Ben mentioned, that when you look at the tzitzis, it's supposed to make you think above and not below. And I countered him that it's also there is an intermediary step that you're leaving out, and that is to think about the yam, the sea. But okay, it's an interesting point. I do like it. So Ben Yashakayach. I think Ezra's hand was up for a while. Ezra?
Yeah, I have a question. We know that if an individual is in a mate is sitting there, we know that the tum'ah rises directly up. But if something covers the mate, like for example an ohel, or even the dirt of a cemetery, that normally stops the tumah. That was my understanding, and I could be wrong. So therefore, just to say that the tumah from the mate, based on that understanding, then tumah the mate is basically stopped by the earth of the kever itself, and would not affect the tzitziot. It's just to me it's just a bizayon. You're not showing proper kavod to the tzitzit, and so therefore that's the reason why he's telling him to lift it up. Now,
No. The Gemara says a different reason. The Gemara says in order kadei shelo yomru, in order that they don't say that now they're macharfim isanu, achshav macharfim isanu. So it can't be because the honor of the tzitzis, because it says it's because of they're mocking us. But your point about tumah is a good point, and and I must say I'm impressed because the laws of tumah are very complicated, and it's nice to see someone have a source about tumah and quote it.
I have another question.
Before you do it, I just want to mention that biblically, there might be room to say that the tumah doesn't elevate because there's a space of a tefa. There needs to be, in order for something to be a tent above a mace, there needs to be a handbreadth of empty space. So a coffin normally has about a tefach, maybe a handbreadth of empty space between the body and the wood of the coffin that's above it. So if that's normally the case, that would mean that the coffin becomes like the tent, and above it you would not be tumah. The only thing is two things. Number one is rabbinically there still would be tumah above it, and additionally, I don't know if you know this, but in the cemeteries they charge an extra fee afterwards because they're going to have to fill in the grave. Why? Because after some time, the coffin breaks and the earth closes up this space between the coffin and the body. So what ends up happening after some time, and so this is just basically would mean that there isn't that space, and it's not an oihel anymore. It's not a tent anymore. And what ends up happening is it would probably be biblical tumah according to the Torah. So I don't know if it helps, but Ezra, you had a second question.
Yeah, the second question is, where it says, Bichia says, Dalia kedei shelo yomru lemachal ba'in etzleinu ve'achshav machrifin otanu. Isn't he say, isn't that translatable as, so that they would not say that tomorrow they will be coming to us, meaning that they'll pass on, but now they're making fun of us.
Right.
So what does it mean? You know, does it mean that in the future they will come and join us, meaning they will also be dead? But now because they are alive, they're actually being
It's an interesting term.
mocking.
What is the specific, what is the true meaning of that term? In other words, it definitely means that they're mocking us. But what does it mean exactly? Tomorrow they're coming to us, and now they're mocking us. So the commentaries discuss what the meaning is. There's one explanation is they're going to die, like you mentioned. That so in other words, they themselves are going to die and not going to be able to fulfill mitzvahs, and now they think they're going to mock us. They're going to be like they're going to be with us in the same position in a little while. And another explanation is that they're going to come and pray by us. So that tomorrow they're going to go and pray by our grave, and they think they're just going to mock us now, and then they're going to come to us and pray as if we don't have any feelings, and we'll just they can mock us and then go and beg us for blessings. So that's another one of the explanations.
So they're using the word etzlenu as tzali to pray.
No. They're going to come next to us, etzlenu, and it doesn't, in between the words it means and pray. What are they coming for? They're going to come to pray. It's not one of the words that's mentioned there, but they're going to come and ask Hashem at our grave. They're going to be begging us to ask Hashem for something for them, and so it doesn't actually say the word pray, but they're going to come to us. What are they coming to us for? It would mean to pray.
Rabbi?
Yeah. Well, actually, one second. Before Moshe, Robert's been holding. Yeah, Robert.
Thank you. I'm just curious if there's a correlation between the law of shotness versus when your tzitzit gets soiled. We know what tzitzit are made out of, so you don't have to worry about it being, not kosher. But the question being is there such a time when a tzitzit or any garment is so violated, so stained or whatever, that you should, as a Jew, it defeats the cause of wearing it, and you should not wear it any longer and substitute a new one or cleaner. So again, shotness is a different set of laws relative to the clothing and its composition, and you can wear it as a Jew, versus that if something becomes so defiled or so violated, tuma, that you should not continue to wear it, and then it's essentially defined as being unkosher. Does that make sense?
I'm totally not understanding.
Okay.
Shotness is a prohibition.
Right, but
Of
shotness
wool
is
and linen together.
all right, but so that only deals with that, and for no other reason, to make sure that those two fabrics are not mixed, right?
So those two fabrics can never be mixed. However,
Right,
interestingly
so
enough,
all right. So I guess we'll leave that out. What I'm saying is, so with tuma, is there a time when something gets so dirty that it defeats the purpose for you to wear it because of what it means to be an observant Jew? And so therefore, what is the do you just keep cleaning it until it falls apart, or do you just say you bury it like you buried a ripped book, or
right?
So I'm just trying to differentiate.
Yeah.
when
Okay,
it
fine.
becomes-
So,
yeah.
so two things. First of all, regarding what you said about shotness, it's interesting that shotness, there is a law that if you wear the techelas, if you have the blue string, then you actually can have shotness, and it was traditional to have shotness on the tzitzis, because the tzitzis was made out of linen, and the garment and the string techelas means wool. So and that's why it's in the Torah. It's right next to the two laws are right next to each other. So there is such a concept of shotnez and tzitzis. Not nowadays. Nowadays we don't have the blue, so we can't do the we don't do the shotnez at all. So we never have shotnez. Now regarding the tuma of tzitzis, it's really, I don't know if tuma would be the right word. Tuma is a spiritual As Ruvain just texted me, I should mention that tuma is really a spiritual impurity. It's not dirt. It's not physical dirt. That's what tuma is. But your question more is about physical dirt. If it's dirty and it gets old and rubbed out, and so there's a few problems with tzitzis when they get old. One is that if a string, certain areas, if the string breaks, that could hassle, it could ruin the entire tzitzis. And other situations is it just gets old looking and smelly and whatever. So that, it doesn't look Kiddush Hashem, you walking around with
befitting to wear, right?
Fitting to wear. It's not honorable for a yid to wear it. So these are at these times you put the tzitzis in shemus, and it's buried. Now the truth of the matter is I'm not 100% sure if it's obligation. It's an obligation to put it in shemus. It is the tradition. There are certain things that we put in shemus, even though maybe you could be more lenient with them. And I'd have to look up if tzitzis is one of them. Is it? And when we talk about tzitzis, is it only the strings that should be put in shemus, or is it the garment as well? So there's the garment part and the strings part. And I'm not 100% sure if it's an obligation, but that's the tradition, is to put it in, and you just put it in the shemus, in the burial.
Are the men buried with tzitzis?
So that's another question. That's an interesting question that you ask. It's a very good question, actually, Susan, because it's so apropos right here.
Super ignorant.
It's a very good question. Let's come back to it because Moshe had a question before you.
Okay.
Robert, I think we answered your question. Is that good? Robert, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Moshe.
I think getting back to Robert, I think he means the klipot associated being in the cemetery too, the shadim and the klipot that might be associated with the the kever, being around the kever, especially if the casket breaks or anything should happen, that there could be, I think that's what, am I correct, Robert? That's what you were trying to get at?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Moshe.
Because, there are shadim in the cemetery and, there's klipot, things that are impure, tuma, more or less.
So I'm not familiar with this field of klipot, and you got to speak to your Kabbalist maybe for that, or your
that's where basically we heard it. That's where I heard it from.
Expert, klipot expert. So I don't really know. Yeah, I didn't get that from your question, Robert. I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, that's okay. It's a good discussion. I enjoy them.
So I don't know the klipot field. Okay, Yehuda. No, Susan. Susan had a question. So Susan was mentioning, and that's a really powerful question that she asked, and that is that aren't the dead buried in tzitzis? Isn't that an embarrassment to the dead because they're not able to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis, and yet we're putting tzitzis right on top of them?
No.
And the tradition is that they are buried in tzitzis, and so there's many different customs. Many different customs. Some have a custom to hassle the tzitzis, to break the one of the strings that ruins the tzitzis, and this way it's not like they are wearing tzitzis, because the tzitzis that they're wearing are really not kosher, so it's not an embarrassment to them. But there are other customs that do have the tzitzis, have them buried in tzitzis, and the question would be, what would be the reason, and isn't that a problem of being buried with tzitzis? So it is discussed. There's a lot of different discussions about this being buried, and it's called the Talis Shel Mason. So I'm just gonna show you from some of the commentaries. This is such a good question, because it's really talked about in Tosfos over here. Tosfos over here discusses he says that there is a Gemara that says that we put tzitzis on the talus of the mason because otherwise it would be embarrassing for them, or it's not a problem of loyeg larosh. So it's not a problem of mocking them. So the question is, how does that Gemara fit with our Gemara? This is Tosfos's question. The Gemara says that you bury the dead in the talus, and it's not a problem of loyeg larosh. It's not a problem, even though they're buried with tzitzis. And the question is, our Gemara says that you can't even walk near with your tzitzis dragging on top of the kever with tzitzis. So you can't have your tzitzis on top of the grave, but you can have the dead person buried in the tzitzis, and that's not a problem. And he says that Tosfos answers over here that when we wear the tzitzis, we are called a mitzvah. We are commanded to do it. He's buried with tzitzis, but he's not fulfilling the mitzvah because he's not commanded to do it, and therefore that doesn't bother him. But when he sees us that are commanded to do it, that's a problem. Then Tosfos asks, but we take off the tzitzis. Why do we do that? Why don't we continue this tradition of burying with tzitzis? So Tosfos says that they used to wear a four-cornered garment always. Everyone that was involved preparing the deceased also wore tzitzis. And therefore, it was embarrassing if the dead person didn't have tzitzis.
Oh.
But we don't wear tzitzis, if we put tzitzis on the dead, it would be considered embarrassing. So you see how to apply the law, it depends on the situation. In other words, the law is we can't mock the dead. But what is mocking the dead? So in a time when everyone is wearing tzitzis, and when they wore tzitzis their entire life, if we don't put tzitzis on them, that's considered mocking the dead.
Right.
But if in a time when no one wears tzitzis, then putting tzitzis on them would be mocking them.
Whatever the current custom.
Now, what about people who used to wear tzitzis? Maybe for them we should put on tzitzis, and for others that didn't wear tzitzis, don't put on them tzitzis. So then it'll be embarrassing for the other grave that this one has tzitzis, they don't. So now Tosfos then brings that there was a country or a city that they would remove the tzitzis, because tzitzis, if you add up the letters of tzitzis, it equals 613 with the knots and the strings. The equivalent, the number of tzitzis, the numerical value of the word tzitzis is 600, and the knots are 5 and the strings are 8, so it's 600 plus 5 and 8 is 613, and it looks like the person fulfilled the entire Torah, and that would be not true because we all sin, and therefore that would be a reason to remove the tzitzis. But Tosfos says, I don't like that reason. Why do we wear tzitzis today? We don't fulfill the whole Torah, so it should be like it looks like we're lying when we wear tzitzis. According to that reason, it looks like we're lying when we wear tzitzis and we're not fulfilling the entire Torah because, people sin and yet we still wear tzitzis. So therefore, Tosfos doesn't like this reason of why we would remove the tzitzis. Now he says, possibly we rely on something that it mentions in a statement that it mentions in Tractate Smachos, where one of the rabbis said, remove the tzitzis from me. And even though the Gemara seems to argue there are certain things that we follow these type of sources, even though the Gemara says differently, but the Medrash says one way and we follow that. And he brings a source like on a fast day, follow what the Gemara says to read something from Devarim. Instead, we read Vayachal, which is in Parshas Kisisa. So we don't always follow the Gemara's final version. We sometimes follow other midrashic books, like here it's referring to the Gemara, the Mishnah Smachos, which is not considered as normally as authoritative as a Talmud, but yet that could be the reason. Now he mentions at the end that the Ritzvah would tie them into the corner in order to fulfill all opinions. In other words, on the one hand, maybe they should have tzitzis. On the other hand, if you cover it, if you hide it, it's okay, it's kosher. So he would stuff it into the corner of the tzitzis. This way, it was not visible, so it was like covered. And at the same time, so you're trying to cover both ends. You're supposed to have tzitzis, or you're not supposed to have tzitzis. So his opinion was they should have tzitzis, but have it covered over, similar to our Gemara, which says that as long as he lifted up the tzitzis, it was okay. Or if you hide it inside your garment, it's considered okay. It's not embarrassing because you're hiding it. Like we spoke about tefillin, if it's covered over, right? If you remember the other Gemara that we mentioned, the tefillin, if it's covered over, like the hand tefillin is normally covered, so it's not a problem. It's only the head tefillin that's a problem in a cemetery. So this is the Tosfos over here. And as I mentioned, there are different opinions about the burial with tzitzis, and how that doesn't contradict our Gemara here. So again, we're trying not to embarrass and mock the dead. And would it be, at the same time, we're burying them with tzitzis. I'm just going to mention to you the other opinions that he brings down here. So he brings that nowadays, the Gemara Menachos explains that we should put tzitzis on the talis of mesim, and why don't we nowadays do that? And we're not worried about that opinion. So there's So let's go through these reasons. Tosfos explains that only in the earlier generations that they were very careful of tzitzis, which I just explained. So if you didn't put tzitzis, that would be embarrassing, because they'll realize that they're not since everyone is careful of tzitzis, if you don't put tzitzis on this person, it looks like maybe they didn't fulfill the mitzvah in their lifetime. And people who are preparing the deceased are wearing tzitzis. And if you don't put tzitzis on the deceased, it's considered mocking them. But nowadays, that people don't fulfill this mitzvah, so if you put tzitzis on them, it'll be the opposite. It'll look like you're saying that they fulfilled this mitzvah and they really didn't. And even those that fulfilled it, it's not fit because it's embarrassing the others that we mentioned. Another explanation, he says that it's a testimony that they fulfilled the entire Torah, and we said that Tosfos doesn't like that answer. Another explanation is that one of the rabbis said in the Masechta Smachos, in this tractate, that you should remove the tzitzis, and we follow that opinion, even though it doesn't fit with our Gemara and or with the Gemara Menachos, which says you should have tzitzis. Now he says another opinion that there is an opinion that holds mitzvahs are not going to be nullified in the future, and in the future the deceased are going to stand up with their clothing. And if they don't have tzitzis, it'll be an avera, it'll be like a sin, and therefore we bury them with tzitzis, so when they stand up, they should be able to have tzitzis. However, that Gemara follows that opinion. But we hold that when Mashiach comes in the after Tchias HaMesim, their mitzvahs will not be applicable then, and therefore we don't have to bury with tzitzis because there's not going to be mitzvahs then. In other words, that Gemara that says you should bury with tzitzis doesn't apply because we don't paskin that way, even though that the source of that Gemara is based on an opinion that we don't follow. It's based on an opinion that we will need to do mitzvahs when Tchias HaMesim happens, the resurrection of the dead happens, and we follow the opinion that we won't need to do mitzvahs when the resurrection happens. I should mention that in Hasidic teachings, it mentions this opinion that we don't have to do mitzvahs when Mashiach comes, which doesn't mean that we don't have to do the mitzvahs. It means they won't be mitzvahs. They won't be commandments. It'll be done automatically. So a deeper meaning of that we don't have to do mitzvahs when Mashiach comes. It means that the mitzvahs will be done automatically, which basically would mean that Hashem, after he does the miracle of resurrecting the dead, he can also put tzitzis on the person as well. In other words, we will automatically be fulfilling the mitzvahs. Now, then it brings a sfas emes over here that that they would only remove the blue part of the tzitzis, but the white they would actually keep on. That's an interesting medium, like a medium view, a way of diplomatic view, that the white they would have, and that's why in our Gemara it says the blue, that your blue tzitzis is on top of the grave, because the blue is the one thing that we don't put on the mace is the blue. So and nowadays we don't have blue, so we only fulfill the mitzvah with the white. So the point is that we don't put the mesim, the dead, should not do the mitzvah b'shleimus. He says the dead should not be fulfilling the mitzvah completely. So in the olden days they would remove the blue and they would just have the white. And now we even in our lifetime we put on the white part of the tzitzis. So if the dead would wear our tzitzis, then they would be fulfilling the mitzvah completely the way we do it, and therefore we ruin one of the corners of the tzitzis, and that's why nowadays we don't have kosher tzitzis. We're not buried with kosher tzitzis. In any event, it is a big discussion, and this is not the end. I just read a few things over here, but it's a big discussion, and thank you, Susan, for bringing it up. But it does explain this final view explains why he specifically mentions the blue. It's interesting that he came up with this idea that it's that the only question that needs to be explained on this final explanation is, what is the reason we don't want the dead to fulfill a mitzvah completely? So that has to be looked into. I'd have to look up the source. It's the sfas emes is the source of that. So that would be the one thing to look into. In the meantime, I wanted to mention, I never answered my initial question. My initial question was that here we're talking about dragging tzitzis on top of a grave. Why are we not concerned about the daled amos, the 4 cubits? Why are we only concerned about the dragging on top of the grave? And that was the question that we initially started with. And the answer to that question is that we have to realize that in the olden days, how did they wear tzitzis? Nowadays, you go to a Judaica store and you buy tzitzis and you put it on between your undershirt and your shirt. You put on a pair of tzitzis, you pay your $30 and $35, $40 in outside of New York, and you make, either if you don't wear a talis, then you recite a bracha on tzitzis. And if you do wear a talis, then the bracha that you say on the talis goes for the tzitzis. But that's the way we do it today, tzitzis. In the olden days, when they wore a jacket or they wore a shirt, they wore a robe, that robe was 4 corners. So they would wear, it was like a towel that they wrapped around themselves, let's say. So that towel that they wrapped around themselves, that was how they wore. That was their clothing for the day. I'm sure it was a nice big towel, beach-sized towel, and it wrapped around nicely. And maybe, I'm sure there was some way that they had it, but their garment was tzitzis. That was their garment. So the garment had tzitzis hanging from it. So imagine you're wearing a towel and you have tzitzis coming out of the 4 corners. And that's what everyone wore. Maybe you had a belt around it, so it stayed nice and tight around you, and you wouldn't unwrap and unravel. And so you had your garment. Now you're going to the cemetery, and what's the law? You're going to have to take off your tzitzis. You won't have any clothing.
Oh my God.
So the law is that that's not mocking the dead, because the dead understand that you need to wear clothing. Okay. So when you wore tzitzis in the olden days, that was your garment that you wore around you. Nowadays, we don't have 4-cornered garments, so we add a garment to be tzitzis. We add an additional garment to be considered tzitzis, and that is that garment is like a special mitzvah garment. In the olden days, that was their clothing. So you wouldn't need to remove your tzit. You wouldn't need to remove your clothing to go to the cemetery. And instead, you would wear your clothing, and the dead would understand that you're not mocking them. However, don't put your tzitzis on top of their stone. Don't go and drag your tzitzis on top of them and rub it in. You're okay. You're wearing your clothing, fine. It has tzitzis, no problem. But don't go rub it in. Don't go and put your tzitzis right on top of the grave and say, aha, I have tzitzis and you don't. So that's what the Gemara is saying here, that Reb Yonason, they all wore tzitzis. They wore tzitzis as part of their clothing. They didn't have to worry about going within 4 cubits of the dead. But we weren't supposed to put their tzitzis on top of the grave. For us, how does this apply to us? For us, we're wearing a garment that's just tzitzis. We should take off our tzitzis when we go within 4 cubits of a grave, either that or cover it. In other words, our tzitzis is hanging out. We should put it inside our clothing. That's the custom. The custom is to put it inside our clothing, and so it's not out. And if it's covered, it's okay. Just like we learned earlier about tefillin, that's in a bag. And so our tzitzis, we cover it over, and it's not a problem of wearing tzitzis. And that's why here it doesn't mention the 4 cubits. It mentions putting the tzitzis on the grave. Okay, so that I think clarifies an important point. And then we got up to the Gemara. The Gemara brought this verse of Benayahu ben Yehoyada. Now, Benayahu ben Yehoyada, what is the verse that it brings? So it says, Ben Ishchai, Rav Pa'alim, Mikabatzel, Mikabzel, and it says he was this Ben Ishchai, the son of a live person. Rav Pa'alim, he did a lot of good deeds, many actions. Mikabatzel, from the city of Kabatzel, and he smote the 2 lions of Moab, the 2 commanders of Moab, and he went down and hit the lion in the bar, in the pit on the day of snow. And we did this Gemara. Let's just explain it. So Rashi on this Gemara says he humbled, I should say, the 2 generations of the 2. So when it says that he smote the Ariel of Moab, the commanders of Moab, it means he embarrassed, so to speak. He put to shame the people who lived in the time of the 2 Beis Hamikdashes that are called Ariel. They're called lions. The two temples were called Ariel. They were called lions that are of Moab, meaning started with David, who was a descendant of Moab, because he came from Rus, who came from Moab, which is the holiday of Shavuos. We customary to read the book of Rus. Some read it in Shul, some read it as part of their Tikkun Leil Shavuos, part of their. But Rus is connected to the holiday of Shavuos because that's the lineage of King David. And so Rus came from Moab. She was a Moabite, and we call the Beis Hamikdash the Moabite, like the origin of the Beis Hamikdash is from Moab, because it was built by King Solomon, who was from the King David tribe, wanted to build it. And King Solomon is the son of King David, who's the grandchild of Rus, or the great grandchild of Rus. So that's the translation of Rashi, and then the Gemara continues, and it says, what does it mean he's a Ben Ish Chai? And the Gemara says that even when he died, his father Yehoyada, even when he died, he was called Chai because he was such a righteous person. He was called alive, because not such a righteous, any righteous person really is called alive when they're the tzaddikim are called alive when they're even in their death, and that has to do with the fact that their life is about spirituality. It's not just about the physical, because the physical body dies, but the spiritual lives on. So if in their life they were concentrated on the spiritual, so even in their death they're still alive. And the soul, of course, lives on as well. So that's another point. Now, Rav Pa'ola Mikabatzel, he did a lot of good deeds from Kabatzel. So the Gemara translates it. He added, he multiplied and gathered together advancement and accomplishment in Torah, which generally is translated that he had a lot of students. He had a lot of students, and he smote the two Ariel of Moab, as Rashi explained, that he did not leave anyone similar to him. He put everyone to shame in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash because of his greatness. And he went down and he smote the Ari, the lion, on the day inside the bar, inside the pit, on the day of snow. So the first explanation is that he broke the ice and lowered himself to go to the mikvah, which was not an obligation. He did it as an extra element of righteousness. He went to the mikvah even in the ice. Now that's quite an act, and it calls him. He smote the lion because the lion is the comfort. He had such strength that he was overpowered the lion, which is which is like impossible to win over, impossible to go into ice. I mean, you try to go into a cold, swimming pool, on a cold day, impossible. And here he broke the ice on a cold day and went into the swimming pool. I mean, that is smiting a lion. And the other opinion is that he studied the entire Sifra Devei Rav, this very hard medrash, which is also called smiting a lion because it's hard. That's the way Tosfos explains. It's very complicated. And he did that all in a day of the winter, on a Yom HaSheleg, which means the day of the winter when it's a short day. And he exerted himself and accomplished that. And so that's where we got up to, that we see here that the concept of dead is applicable to the wicked, and the concept of live is applicable to the righteous. And even when the live are dead, they're still alive. And that's where we got up to, and my time is up. So I have to conclude.